Alrighties. Good morning, everyone. Hope you are having a beautiful day so far. My name is Rio, and on behalf of the Wavelink team, I would like to thank you for joining our FortiClient and ZTNA InfoBite session. Please ask away all your questions during the session, as there will be a Q&A segment at the end, where 5 lucky people will be winning a $40 Amazon e-card based on engagement. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Without further ado, I would like to welcome one of our pre-sales kings, Kieran O'Brien.
Thanks, Rio. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming. As Rio has discussed, today's session will be on ZTNA and FortiClient, and we'll be focusing on off-net teleworking for remote access. Sorry, we'll be going over introduction to what ZTNA is for teleworking, how FortiClient and FortiGate work together to create the solution, what pain points this solves with 2 examples, a short product demo, and what license options are available. Before we jump in, just want to take a couple of minutes to introduce Wavelink in case you have not dealt with us previously. We were established in 1998 with a key focus of growing our strategic vendors and our partners' presence. And we're doing this by building capability and depth by aggregating solutions and providing specialized product knowledge and product intimacy. Wavelink was introduced to Fortinet as we were a Maroon Networks distributor since 2008, and that was to complement our connected health business unit. Since Fortinet's acquisition of Maroon, Wavelink has been working hard to become the leading Fortinet distributor within Australia. And thanks to the great work of our team internally, our great partners, and the awesome work of Fortinet, we have seen 4 years of continuous really strong growth, and we are proud to be announced as Fortinet's 2021 APAC Distributor of the Year. We are 100% Australian owned and have a company culture that is responsive, which makes it easy to do business with us with a yes, we can do attitude. And we have many other benefits, including a professional services program that includes staging, rollout, and installation services. So let's jump straight into an introduction on ZTNA. So Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA, for today's focus of remote access, enables secure access to internal or cloud-hosted applications for remote users. It operates on an adaptive trust model where trust is never implicit and access is granted on a need-to-know least privilege basis defined by granular policies. And ZTNA gives remote users seamless and secure connectivity to private applications without ever placing them on the network or exposing these applications to the internet. And Zero Trust Network Access is an access control method that utilizes client device identification, authentication, and zero trust tags to provide role-based application access. It gives administrators the flexibility to manage network access for on-net local users and off-net remote users. Access to applications is granted only after it goes through device verification, authenticate the user's identity, you authorize that user, and then you perform context-based posture checks using zero trust tags. Prior to FortiOS 7.0, remote access utilized a traditional VPN tunnel for remote access to access private cloud, on-site services, and secure public cloud services. With ZTNA and FortiOS 7.0 and above, this VPN tunnel is replaced with the ZTNA application access layer. And this brings zero trust principles to remote access with the use of FortiClient. And some of the limitations of that traditional VPN remote access solution is that it only provides one-time trust check when you're doing that initial establishment of the tunnel, and access is granted to define network segments with your firewall policies dictating what protocols and applications can be accessed on the network. The benefit of moving to ZTNA for a remote access approach is that it brings that zero trust to remote access and those off-net users, and it provides that granular access and security profiles on a per application basis. and you've got that per session verification of user and devices. So why should we care? It's fairly simple. More than half of employees will work hybrid post-COVID. And we've already seen the global workforce shift from 4% teleworking to 30% teleworking at the end of 2021, which has for many customers caused issues with implementing or scaling up their remote access solution to accommodate for these teleworkers. So what are the components for Fortinet's ZTNA solution? Well, ZTNA is not a product within itself, it's a feature, kind of like SD-WAN. And to enable ZTNA, you need both a product that runs FortiOS, whether it's a FortiGate or a FortiGate VM, and you also need FortiClient. So FortiClient is the ZTNA agent, and this allows connecting from anywhere, allows access to applications hosted in the company data center, cloud data center, or SaaS. These endpoints are continuously monitored to ensure up-to-date posture information and to ensure each connection is done automatically without user involvement back to the FortiGate to access these applications. FortiOS is acting as an access proxy, and this sits between the endpoints and the applications. And this is doing continuous validation of the posture and identity of each connection, and it provides secure micro-segmented access for each session. The advantages of Fortinet's ZTNA solution approach is that it leverages your existing FortiGate firewalls, and you're extending that security of that FortiGate to those protected users wherever they are. Again, ZTNA is not a licensed feature of FortiOS and FortiClient, it's just a part of the product that needs to be turned on. And it provides simplified management and reporting thanks to integration with Fortinet's security fabric. And it is relatively easy to transition from VPNs to ZTNA solution as you're only changing one component of the overall remote access solution. As an overview of how ZTNA works, the solution is achieved via policies pushed out by FortiClient EMS to the endpoint devices that are running FortiClient, such as a user's computer or their mobile phone. Security Fabric then synchronizes with FortiGates, and this provides telemetry from FortiClient EMS to the FortiGates for things such as ZTNA tags. FortiGates then act as access proxies for the applications, and they're responsible for creating secure tunnels with the remote users via FortiClient. And the FortiGate is proxying HTTP and TCP traffic over a secure TLS connection with the remote client. And this enables that seamless access from the client to these protected servers, whether they're on-premise, data center, public and private cloud, without needing to form an IPsec or VPN tunnel. So let's discuss FortiClient and FortiClient EMS and what part it has to play in ZTNA. First, I want to run through what's new in FortiClient and FortiClient EMS 7.0, as there have been some really interesting additions recently. So as of FortiClient EMS 7.0.3, we have separate endpoint profiles to allow for a simpler and modular approach to endpoint profile management, kind of similar to how security profiles exist on a FortiGate. You now configure separate remote access profiles, ZTNA connection profiles, web filtering profiles, and so on. You then configure these different combinations of these profiles as part of an endpoint policy, and that policy you then apply to the endpoint. So this is extremely useful if you have multiple endpoint policies that share common settings. You can now consolidate those settings into a profile and then apply that profile to the multiple endpoint policies. There's been some major updates to FortiClient license and EMS communication, and this allows for the EMS administrator to prohibit or allow end users to shut down FortiClient completely. This feature is only available on Windows currently. And then also FortiClient now locally stores its applied license expiry date. So even if FortiClient cannot reach EMS, the features that it's licensed for are still available to the endpoint until the stored license date expires. So for example, if the FortiClient EMS instance an endpoint was connected to was licensed until 2026, and that endpoint lost its connection to EMS, it will remain licensed and fully functional up till the end of 2026. EMS now offers administrators a convenient means of collecting debug logs available from various backend services into a single archived file. And this diagnostics logs contains information to support teams and investigate issues that pertain to EMS. And it mainly comprises of a lightweight database backup, a snapshot of the CPU and memory usage, EMS logs, and SQL Server files. You can now also send invitation emails from an on-premise EMS server. And this helps non-expert end users to easily connect to EMS by copying and pasting their invitation code, or scanning the QR code in the email, or by clicking the register to EMS link that's in the email. The end users do not need to know the EMS IP address, the port number, or site information in order to connect their endpoint to EMS. All the information that they need is in the email. And you can even enforce that only endpoints that were invited using an invitation email can connect and be managed to the EMS, or you can leave it open so that the email is generic to the user, and then whatever device they're connecting from, that will allow them to connect that and be registered to EMS. As of FortiClient 7.0.3, users can now be authenticated via a web browser HTTP page, allowing for more methods to gather user information for authentication. Also, as of FortiClient 7.0.3, you can configure logs to be sent to FortiAnalyzer Cloud. To use this feature, you must have the appropriate license for FortiAnalyzer Cloud and entitlement, but the functionality provided is exactly similar to on-premise FortiAnalyzer. You can also configure FortiClient to automatically restore files that are detected as ransomware encrypted as of 7.0.2. You can only configure this feature using XML currently, so it's more an advanced feature, but the feature is there. There are many, many more improvements and feature additions that we won't cover. For a full list, please check out the FortiClient 7.0.0 new feature guide at docs.fortinet.com. So how does the solution and features work for ZTNA remote access? First, I want to discuss what each component really does for ZTNA with respect to each other. So there are two parts that FortiClient and FortiClient EMS does in the solution. FortiClient EMS is used to create, manage, and monitor tagging rules, as well as being responsible for signing endpoint certificate requests and reporting these certificates along with tagging rules and endpoint compliance status to the FortiGates. FortiClient is then responsible for constantly checking if it matches the rule sets assigned to it by EMS. And if any are matched, it will then report that back to EMS. So what are tagging rules? Tagging rules help capture the security posture of endpoints by assigning ZTNA tags according to a rule sets that you create. ZTNA policies then utilize these tags to perform posture checks and grant access to applications, or vice versa, if you could configure it to deny access to an application based on a tagging rule. Tagging rules can then be used on many endpoint factors. They can be based on many endpoint factors. Available rule sets differ for Windows, macOS, and Linux due to their differing architectures. So for example, on the slide, we are checking that antivirus software is installed and running. And we're also checking that the OS version is Windows 7 or Windows 10. And right at the bottom there, we've got a rule logic section. And this says that this tag will apply only if rule 1 and rule 3 match, or if only rule 2 is matched. You can then view these and what endpoints are assigned with each tag in FortiClient EMS under the Zero Trust Tag Monitoring section. This page shows endpoint information such as the endpoint's name, the user that's currently logged in, what operating system they're running, current IP addresses, and when that endpoint was tagged to that ZTNA tag. You can monitor the available ZTNA tags that an endpoint is matching against directly from FortiClient also. And this allows users to know exactly what ZTNA rules they are matching in the event that they need to assist with troubleshooting. And visibility of this can be disabled if you require it to be. You can also allow for creation of the ZTNA rules directly from FortiClient on the endpoint. And this can be utilized to allow network administrators to create and test rules to speed up the creation of corporate ZTNA rules for production. It is recommended, however, to disable visibility of this functionality and only configure rules for EMS for an instance that is actually in production. This is more useful for administrators to create rule sets and to see whether they would work. So that covers off what FortiClient and EMS does for ZTNA remote access. Let's have a look at FortiGate and what its role is in ZTNA. As we did with FortiClient, quickly first want to look at what's new in FortiOS 7.0 and the newly released FortiOS 7.2. So one of the roles for FortiGate is to monitor changes to the endpoint tags that are updated by EMS. When a change is detected, the endpoint's active ZTNA sessions must match the new ZTNA policies again before the data is allowed to continue. And changes to the ZTNA policy, such as changing the tag matching logic, will also re-trigger this verification process and will check the clients against the current policies. Obviously, if it matches the current policies, traffic will be allowed to continue. And if it doesn't match, the traffic will be stopped. There's also now further support for configuring features such as load balancing, TCP forwarding, and SAML in the graphical user interface as of 7.0.2. Prior to 7.0.2, these settings were only configurable through the CLI. UTM scanning and deep inspection is now supported for multiple protocols and a ZTNA TCP forwarding access proxy. So in addition to HTTP and HTTPS, mail protocols such as SMTP, IMAP, and POP3, and also file sharing protocols such as SMB and CIFS are now supported as of FortiOS 7.0.4. A new feature of the brand new FortiOS 7.2 is ZTNA scalability is now increased to support up to 50,000 concurrent endpoints. This is thanks to communication between FortiOS and FortiClient EMS being improved with more efficient queries that now request incremental updates instead of a whole chunk update. FortiOS 7.2 also brings an enhancement that enables customers to use an IP pool as the source IP or to use the client's original IP as the source IP. And this allows ZTNA to support more sessions without source port conflicts. Again, this is an enhancement as part of that scalability. Sorry, wrong way. Also new to FortiOS 7.2, user information and TLS sessions are synchronized between HA members for ZTNA proxy sessions. So when a failover occurs, the new primary unit will continue allowing these sessions for the logged in users without asking the client what their certificate is or to re-authenticate again. And this provides a seamless solution during a HA failover for those remote users. They won't even know. It will just continue. There are many more improvements and feature additions that we won't go over. Again, for a full list, please check out the FortiGate new feature guide at docs.fortinet.com. So how does FortiGate work in the ZTNA solution? Adding to the solution we saw previously, FortiGate is where the access proxy rules, authentication scheme, and ZTNA rules are created to control access to the protected applications, and it's also acting as that proxy to enable the remote connections. FortiGate and FortiClient are then responsible for establishing encrypted tunnels for HTTP and TCP trafficking, verifying endpoint client certificates, and providing continuous posture checks on existing sessions. So the first step to configuring a FortiGate for ZTNA is to create a ZTNA server rule. And this is where you define a server that contains an application and how it should be accessed externally. Next step is to create a service-server mapping where you dictate how to match a server against a specific server. And when you're creating this mapping, you can configure many optional services such as load balancing across multiple servers. You then set up user authentication, and an authentication scheme and rule must be configured to trigger that user authentication. There are many authentication methods that can be used, such as Radius, LDAP, Active Directory, or SAML authentication. You can also centralize your solution with a FortiAuthenticator, and you can deliver multi-factor authentication using Forti tokens. The final step is to create a ZTNA rule to allow for the traffic to pass through the access proxy. And here you define how to match those ZTNA tags that you're applying from EMS, or the rules you're applying from EMS to the FortiClient. You can also limit where users can connect from. So for example, if you wanted to allow only users within Australia, geolocation of Australia, you can set that up. You can provide what security features you'd like to apply on a per rule setup. So for example, if I was setting this up to allow connections to an RDP server, then I would have a IPS rule set, an application rule set that would be particular to RDP connections. Similar thing, if you had a HTTP server, you'd then create IPS rule sets and maybe antivirus rule sets that are specific to a HTTP server. Current ZTNA sessions can be viewed under Log and Report in the FortiGate graphical user interface. And this shows valuable information such as the user, what server and services they're connecting to, and what ZTNA rule is allowing this session to happen. And there's much more further valuable information available in the Details tab. Alternatively, these logs can be viewed from the CLI as well. Now we understand ZTNA, what ZTNA does and what each product does within the ZTNA solution. What pain points does this really solve? In practice, the main thing ZTNA solves for remote access is how to create a predictable experience for users, regardless if they are on net or off net. And this is thanks to that auto secure tunnel creation, providing users with a seamless experience. Securing and providing access to private and public cloud, data center, and on-site applications and services without the need for a VPN. It's reducing the attack surface by limiting applications access only to users who need it, and you're hiding those applications behind a firewall. And finally, providing a heightened security by repeatedly verifying users and devices' posture as they're accessing these applications. So one of the use cases is remote worker access. We've discussed previously, really the main benefits are that ongoing verification, more granular control, and that easier user experience. And one specific use case that crops up quite a bit at the current time is while businesses are working through the process of migrating their existing on-site private application infrastructure to a cloud-hosted platform, is how do we allow remote workers to securely access these on-site solutions to utilize these applications now with this heightened work from home culture that we're seeing currently. So traditionally, there would be a VPN tunnel between the remote teleworker and the head office where the infrastructure resides, and the remote teleworker would need to ensure that they're connected to this tunnel from their device before they're able to utilize this infrastructure. Well, thanks to ZTNA's automatic creation of these encrypted tunnels for remote users, there's no need to have to manually set up remote access IPsec or SSL VPN tunnels, and for the teleworker to ensure that they have an established connection. Once the teleworker's device initiates traffic to that on-site infrastructure, the automated tunnel will be created from FortiClient to the access proxy or the FortiGate without any effort from the teleworker. Once the infrastructure is hosted in the cloud, they can continue to use this ZTNA approach to ensure that they're providing security and risk mitigation in place. You can even put things like conditional access rules to ensure that the tunnel from the client, from the user back to the infrastructure is only established if the client device is Active Directory joined. And this, in this case, would ensure that the user is only accessing internal infrastructure from work supplied assets. To demonstrate this use case, we have a short product demo that Rod will go through now. It consists of a remote client joined to an Active Directory on the left side there, and that can connect to an on-site web server, an RDP server, and an SSH endpoint behind the FortiGate. And this is all done through ZTNA without VPN tunnels. I'll hand it over to you now, Rod.
Great, thanks, Kieran. All right, I'll just change the presenter and share the screen. All right, so here we've got our remote client that Kieran was talking about in the last slide. And let's have a quick look at our ZTNA. So here's our FortiClient. We can see that we're connected to our EMS server. We can disconnect here if we want to. We can also see a few details about that connection. The most important part of this is looking at the telemetry down the bottom here. And you can see that every 60 seconds, FortiClient is going to make a telemetry connection with the EMS server. And that's going to update ZTNA tags for us. And we're going to have a little look at that a little bit more in depth as we get into this demo. So today we're going to make 3 separate connections. We're going to make a browser connection into a web server at our head office. We're going to make a RDP connection into our EMS server, and we're going to make a SSH connection into our FortiAnalyzer. So let's have a look at how that looks. So let's start with our making a connection to a web server. So we've bookmarked our web server here. This is just a URL pointing at our FortiGate, and immediately it asks us for a certificate. This is a certificate that's been pushed from our EMS server to our FortiClient, and it's going to remain with us throughout this session. So we accept that. And then it asks us to log in. So in this case, we've got T. Smith. And there is our connection through to our web server. It's just a static web page. So let's have a look at making an SSH connection into our FortiAnalyzer. So SSH to admin at FortiAnalyzer. It's going to ask us for a password. And if we just do a get system status, we can see that we're now connected into our FortiAnalyzer. And the last connection we want to create is an RDP connection into our EMS server. So there you can see we've connected into our EMS server, so we'll close that down. Now let's have a look at some of the logs that we've got and generated. So there's a number of places that we can do this. Have a look at the FortiGate. Now, just to check that we're actually passing the correct information, we can actually look at the user cache that as users come through. So if we run a diag test application, FC NACD and 7. Normally this would give us a list of all the users through. We've only got one user connected in this lab environment, and here you can see a UID. You can see the serial number of the FortiClient. You can see we're connected to the FortiAD info domain, and the user is T. Smith. You can also see that we're assigned a number of tags. In this case, we've got an all user tag, and we've also got an AD tag. Now, what does that look like from the client perspective? So let's just go back and have a look at the client. So we showed how the connection connected here, but we can get more information from the FortiClient about the end user. And in particular, we can see the zero trust tags that are applied, which are the same that we were seeing in our FortiGate. And if we were then to go over to our EMS server, we'd be able to have a look at our endpoints, and we'll find T. Smith here. If we click on him, we get a lot more information, including the tags that are assigned. Now, tags can be added and removed as events happen on the endpoint. So one of the things that we want to do now is simulate adding a virus or some malware or a particular file to the system which we can track. A test file that's sitting down here, which we'll rename to a different name for the purpose of the test. Now it's just a text file, it's got test.virus in there. So let's have a look at the EMS server and look at our zero trust tags that we've set up. Here's our rules, and you can see that we've got a malicious file detection. So if we edit that, we can see that we're trying to examine a location on the C drive of our end user. In this case, we're looking at the desktop, and we're looking for a file called virus.txt. At the moment, you can see that it's incorrectly named. We'll change that now, and then we'll notice what happens as we go through. So let's just quickly change the name on here. Right. Now, if we check back in our telemetry, remember that I said that key there, you can see that in 48 seconds, the telemetry is going to rescan and look and update the EMS server with anything that it's found. So while we're waiting for that, let's just go in to our website here. And because we're using Chrome, and this is a static web page, we just have to change the settings or clear the cache. And we do have to exit because it is Chrome, and we'll reopen that. Now, while that's opening, let's have a look back at our client, and you can see we're synchronizing currently. So if this particular virus or this particular file was found, we should notice that the tags have changed. In fact, they have. We've got a new tag that's come in here. This is malicious file detection that we had there. So this file has been found on the desktop, and we should also be able to see that in the zero trust tag monitor, and we can see, yep, it's got a malicious file detected, and it was T Smith. So that's all good. So the last part of this demo is to really look at when we reconnect to this web server, we should be denied access. We're given a certificate, but the next part we should essentially be denied access. And the last check of that is in the FortiGate, we can see that if we rerun that, we've added an extra tag into our user that's gone through the FortiGate. And a quick look at the logs, the ZTNA traffic logs, we should be able to get a little bit of history of what's been happening. So you can see down here, 6 minutes ago, we made a TCP connection, we made an RTP connection there. If we look at the detail of that, you can see that we get a little bit of information about the end user. We can see that it's T Smith making a connection, it's an RTP connection, and that the action was accepted. And in particular, the ZTNA rule that matched that traffic to allow it through. And that's how we know that it was actually using ZTNA. A little bit further up in our logs here, you can see that we've actually denied the same connection a little bit later because we had that malicious file. And again, we've got the similar information here through T Smith, and you can see that the policy was denied, and the rule was rule 2, deny malicious traffic coming through. So that's all that I wanted to show you in this demonstration. So I will hand back to Kieran.
Thanks, Rod. So to touch further on use cases, as I've alluded to previously, you can use ZTNA to secure private and public cloud and data center traffic. And access rules can be defined for these services through ZTNA, and you can use a single rule set for on-net and off-net. Again, this is reducing that administration. Thanks to ZTNA's automatic creation of encrypted tunnels for remote users, no need for having to manually set up those IPsec and VPN SSL tunnels. This greatly reduces the customer's attack surface, and it reduces their administration overhead. And it also has this impact on the user's experience because it's providing the same user experience whether they're on site or off site. Because if they're on site, they're just connecting directly to it through the LAN network. And if they're off site, well, all they're doing is connecting directly to it. And then FortiClient and FortiGate is creating that secure tunnel automatically in the background. So as far as the user is concerned, that's actually the same experience as to them being on the network, in the corporate network, whether it's at a branch or a campus. And one of the use cases for this is many companies, especially those in construction and manufacturing, are utilizing a form of IDP server or IDP application hosting for core systems for their business. With many of these customers having moved their solutions from on-site to private cloud providers, provide them a little bit more flexibility, or some are just trying to reduce the amount of infrastructure that they have on site. And you can extend your existing secure connection from the FortiGate to that cloud provider to provide the remote users access through ZTNA. And again, this is allowing those off-net users to seamlessly securely access these IDP servers as if they were in the branch. So let's move on to positioning and SKUs. So if your customer has FortiClient and has FortiGate, ZTNA is not a licensed feature. You just need to enable it and configure it, and off you go. If your customer has FortiClient and they want ZTNA, then a FortiGate is their missing piece. The general items you want to look for when you're scoping a FortiGate for ZTNA is you want to look at the SSL inspection and the thread inspection throughput numbers. And you also want to look at the physical interfaces for the FortiGate. And the reason why you want to look at these three things is the ZTNA solution functionally is identical across every FortiGate model. So all the way from the 40F all the way to the FortiGate 3500F, it all provides the exact same web forwarding, TCP forwarding solution set. If your customer has a FortiGate and they want ZTNA and they don't have FortiClient, you're going to need it. There are 3 editions for FortiClient. There's the VPN and ZTNA edition. This is your minimum license level, and it includes all remote access features needed for traditional VPN and also for ZTNA. And it also includes web filtering and vulnerability remediation. The next step up is EPP and ATP edition, and it bundles in endpoint security features over the VPN and ZTNA inclusions. And this is things such as FortiClient Cloud Sandbox, Fortinet's next generation antivirus, and anti-ransomware protection with automated endpoint quarantining. Next level up is the Managed Endpoint Edition. This is the same license inclusions as EPP and ATP edition, but it's a fully Fortinet managed solution that includes initial provisioning, endpoint onboarding, security fabric integration, and endpoint security monitoring services. As this is a Fortinet managed solution, this is only offered as a FortiCloud hosted service. There is no on-premise air-gapped option. If you want the option of an on-premise deployment, you will have to go from the VPN ZTNA edition or the EPP ATP edition. The specific SKUs used to order the various versions of FortiClient can be found at the bottom of the FortiClient datasheet. And there are 12, 24, 36, 48, and 60-month license options, with FortiCare best practice now being optional. For those keen-eyed in the partner portal, you may have come across a ZTNA ordering guide. The per endpoint license SKUs provided at the bottom of the ordering guide are the exact same SKUs as Cloud Hosted EMS ZTNA edition and Cloud Hosted EMS Managed edition on the FortiClient datasheet. The main point here is that there is a per user license model that is coming in Q2. So be ready for an impending announcement from Fortinet with further details around what this will entail. FortiCare best practices is optional extra that can be added, and this service is recommended for those who have not done FortiClient EMS deployments in the past, or they're not familiar or completely competent with deploying FortiClient with all the features that are required for the deployment. Or if you're wanting to ensure that you get the full potential out of FortiClient during deployment configuration and ongoing maintenance. And this service allows access to things such as deployment and upgrade guidance, vetted playbooks, example scripts, sample configurations, and much, much more. Two of the most frequently asked questions we receive from our partners are, how do I upgrade from one FortiClient license to another? So upgrades can be performed, and we do that via a code term upgrade. All our sales team needs to know is the EMS serial and what edition you would like to be upgraded to. Just keep in mind that you can't, unfortunately, upgrade from an on-premise solution to a cloud-hosted solution, or vice versa. And finally, does ZTNA work with existing FortiGates? The answer is yes. ZTNA will work with any FortiGates as long as they're running FortiOS 7.0 or later. There is a lot of additional useful material, and these can be found in various locations, such as data sheets that are found on Fortinet's website. There's ordering guides, sales sheets, and marketing material that can be found in the Fortinet partner portal that are very, very content rich, and there's lots of really good gems in those. There's even a product trial for FortiClient EMS that allows for 3 licenses of the ZTNA edition of FortiClient. And we will also be sending out a sales and marketing package for all attendees as a thank you for coming along. Now, there is much more to ZTNA than what we have discussed in this info bite. We've just covered off how ZTNA is useful for teleworkers and that off-network access solution. To complete the ZTNA solution, FortiAuthenticator and FortiToken allows you to do identity access management, and this allows you to control who is on the network. There's also FortiNAC, and this allows network access control, which allows you to control what exactly is on your network.
Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions that we've received through the webinar here. The first one for you, Kieran. We have had quite some interest in FortiClient cloud hosted. Are there any feature limitations or limitations for the maximum number of endpoints?
Great question. So currently for on-premise and cloud hosted EMS, they are feature parity. So they have the exact same features between the two. The only catch is FortiClient Cloud can only manage up to 20,000 endpoints currently. Higher limits are coming soon, but we don't have a definitive time frame for that. So if you need EMS to control more than 20,000 endpoints, you will have to go for the on-premise solution.
Oh, great. Next question is, what is driving customer interest in ZTNA?
Yeah, okay, so I think most customers are coming to ZTNA as a way to improve and replace their existing VPN solution for remote access. And I've noticed for some, the better application security is just a bonus. They're just looking for improving slightly and just replacing that slightly clunky VPN solution that they've got.
Okay, last question for the day. Is the secure tunnel created just an SSL VPN?
No, it's not actually. So the encrypted tunnel is a TLS tunnel. So essentially it's similar to SSL VPN tunnel. It uses the same underlying technologies, but the way it functions is not the same as SSL VPN.
Great. Okay, well, that's the end of the questions. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks for calling those out. If anyone would like any further information or discuss how ZTNA would work for one of their customers, please reach out to myself or one of our team members here at Wavelink. I'm more than happy to run through maybe a little bit further, a little bit more technical, and sort of sculpt the solution around the benefits specifically for your customer. And thank you again on behalf of myself and Rod. I'll hand it back to Rio to end the session for us. Thanks, Rio.
Awesome. Thank you, Kieran and Rod. That marks the end of today's session. We would like to thank everyone for attending today and also like to thank all the organizers for making today happen. As promised, keep an eye out on your inbox as we will be sending through a marketing and sales package to all the attendees and to the 5 lucky winners an Amazon e-card within the next business days. For our partners that are signed and registered onto our mission recognition program, a quiz about today's session will be uploaded shortly so you could earn points that are accumulated to win the ultimate Queenstown trip. That's it from us today, everyone. Thank you again for joining us and hope to see you in our future sessions. Bye for now, but not forever.